Welcome you from Torino. My name is Cristina Marozza, and together with my colleague Jolien van der Nuden, it is our pleasure to host you again in a dedicated session, one of the 3 parallel sessions we have in our corporate conference today, a session that is essential as topics in the times we live now. A session about the accessibility, the attractiveness, the affordability, and providing access to all when it comes to lifelong learning opportunities. It is my pleasure to welcome an excellent group of speakers that we will share experiences and reforms and projects in the future on securing access to education, make it more attractive to various kinds of learners. Let's start with just a quick introduction on technicalities, although I'm very aware that all of us, we know already by now by heart how we should proceed in a Zoom meeting. So please keep your microphones muted when you are not invited to speak. Please also select the interpretation channel if you wish so. We have an interpretation available in Russian, Arabic, and French. We also would like to enhance the interactivity of our session, because in the end, if we look at the attractive learning environments, I think an important element is how interactive it is, how we are able also to listen to each other and so on. So please take the chance to post your questions in chat, make remarks. Please use one of the languages we have now secured as interpretation if you want. And then we will also have the chance, we dedicated special space in this session to have also live interaction. So please also raise your hand during the question and answer sessions. If you want to address also a live question or to make a remark, you are more than welcome. I also welcome our participants who are joining us via social media channels. You are also very much encouraged to post your questions. We have a system now to look also at the questions and remarks that come from you, and we will raise it and we will discuss with the speakers. So it is now my pleasure to give the floor to Jolien for the opening, the kickstart of the meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina, and welcome to everyone during this session in the afternoon of the first day of the High Level event. And we would like to discuss together how we can make the system more inclusive and accessible, how we can work on the visibility of skills, because specifically in this period of transformation with the digital and green transition, migration, aging of the population, we all need to become learners, or we all need to stay learners throughout our lives. And learning is a precondition for adaptation, resilience, and personal growth. If people don't have access to learning, they miss out on opportunities and life satisfaction. But what do people need to become active learners? I would now invite to launch a poll on this question. So I would like to invite you all to vote to add your contributions. It will be a word cloud. So you have the possibility to explain what you think we need or people need to become active learners. The link to Mentimeter will be shared in the chat. Also for the people following us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, you will find the link in the chat. And we are really inviting you to leave your ideas, your answers to the question, what do people need to become lifelong learners or active learners? We will not show the answers at this moment, but we will come back to it later. We will also, as introduction to this session, share our reflections on what people need and why we need this session, why we need to discuss this. aspects today. Christina, despite strategic prioritization and investments, still large groups of children, young adult people have no or limited access to learning. Could I ask you, why is this happening, and who are these people at risk? Who are the non-learners?
Thank you, Jolene, and thank you. And this was one of the key topics we have discussed and addressed yesterday in the session Skills for All. Indeed, we witness slow progress when it comes to access and participation to lifelong learning. We still see modest numbers if we look at the statistics, and we also witness gaps in the access. So we know that, for example, those that are living in large urban cities are having more access, and they're enjoying more opportunities to learn. We also witness that people with higher level of education are accessing learning. So, I mean, we know who are these, the groups that are exposed to lower participation in lifelong learning. We know that we talk about people with low level of education, people who are early school leavers, people with obsolete qualifications, rather older workers, members of the ethnic minorities, people with special needs. We only just had finalized now a TAIEX meeting with colleagues from Turkey on the situation of people with disabilities, persons with disabilities, access to lifelong learning, the role of technology, and so on. We also have this major challenge of refugees, of people with migrant background. And in the, I just want to underline on that the EU neighborhood countries and in Central Asia, the profile of migration, the challenge is rather so diverse, and we need to come up with solutions, but also with procedures to capture their vulnerabilities as well. And we also talk about people living in remote areas or from low-income households. We know how much it impacts the income, the poverty, the exposure to social risk, how much it impacts the participation in education and training. In the end, I think we should not talk anymore, because that was somehow the slogan, if I can say like that, of our session yesterday. So how can we build inclusive education by design? So to move away from targeted measures that are of course necessary in special cases, but how can we build education or employment systems that are inclusive by design and relevant for all? And I would give only one justification. Why do we need that? It's so difficult to identify the root causes of, there are so multiple root causes of vulnerability. In the end, we talk about compounded vulnerabilities. So a wide array of risks that arises when a systemic and institutional conditions intersect in the manner that actually create barriers to people's ability to learn, to grow, and to achieve their potential. And I would also say a word about pandemic, and we really need to acknowledge the impact on pandemic on pupils, on parents, on us as teachers or policy makers. And we see already a lot of vulnerabilities emerging or increasing. A lot of countries have lost already the progress they have achieved, for example, in reducing the number of young people not in education, employment, education, or training. So the idea is, how do we deal with losses in education? What is the impact on the learners in primary and lower secondary education? And how graduates will adapt to a changing labor market? So what are the needs for upskilling and reskilling? So all this, in the end, I don't want to anticipate the answers that we will get in the second part of the meeting, but definitely it requires and it calls for an integrated approach to lifelong learning. Now, back to you, Jolene. I know that you have coordinated the session on new forms of learning and making the learning environment more attractive. So even if we manage to expand this learning, the opportunities, there could be still issues of low participation, not only, not having enough opportunities. Which are the other challenges that we should factor in when we promote lifelong learning?
I think an important challenge is motivation. And you already mentioned like so many people who could have limited access to education for several reasons. So I'm almost thinking, do I need to add another challenge? But I think it's important to take into account motivation as an important aspect. If we are interested in something, it's more likely that we will invest in it, that we will try to achieve the goal. Working on it can make us feel like happy, satisfied. So also this counts as well for learning. And we saw during the poll in the grand opening that most of the participants that participated in the poll saw lifelong learning as an opportunity or sometimes as a necessity, but nobody ticked the box like it feels as a burden. But we shouldn't forget that this is not the case for everyone. There are people who have had negative experiences with learning, and then it becomes harder, even if you have the access to motivate yourself or to find a reason to engage in maybe more formal learning activities again, because I think we all realize that we are learning almost every day. And these negative experiences can come because you always were the person in class with the lowest grades. Maybe you were bullied. Maybe you just didn't fit very well in the system because you perceive learning as sitting quietly in a classroom, listening to a teacher, and you have too much energy to sit still, or you'd rather work with your hands, or there can be several reasons why it didn't work out for you. And I think, therefore, it's important that we are able to create positive learning experiences for all learners throughout their lives from the start, so that people will feel like, okay, learning is something that helps me. It's something that I enjoy and that helps me to grow and to achieve my goals, to pursue my ambitions. And learners vary widely in terms of level of knowledge, skills, but also in their personal, professional interests, their aspirations. So the challenge is how can we address these different needs of a very wide diversity of learners, and how can we make learning appealing and useful to all of them? So now we try to kind of identify who are those people at risk and what are the key challenges. Christina, are you already able to explain a bit to us, like how could we increase the accessibility of lifelong learning?
Yes, definitely. I have some answers, but these are not my answers, are the answers of our colleagues who attended the yesterday session on Skills for All, but not only, the session on monitoring and adapting as well. So what I would convey as messages to your question is that we really need to be careful and to move away from promoting exclusively islands of excellence and innovation, if we talk about VET or if we talk about the education system overall. Because there is a risk that was underlined in the monitoring and adapting session, that often we are concentrating and over-prioritizing schools that perform well. So those elite schools that are really, and the resources often go to certain schools that cater better for their children. So we really need to employ solutions and types of management of resources, allocation of resources to all the schools, and to try to mainstream excellence and innovation throughout the system. So definitely there is this idea of approaching the access and participation in education from a holistic manner. We also had yesterday an excellent example on how qualification system, a proper fully fledged national qualification framework and all its procedures and institutions can help building an inclusive lifelong learning system. And in the end, is the backbone of that system that secures this kind of education inclusivity when any kind of learner with any kind of need or constraint can have an access to a learning pathway which is flexible and tailored to its needs. Then there is also the issue of how do we develop and use data sets, the evidence-based making policies, the famous one. So where we need to really make sure, to be sure that data management, the monitoring and the evaluation procedures are sensitive to social risks. Yeah, that are looking into social school disengagement reasons, and that there is a clear approach to, for example, incomplete training journeys, because it's not only about access. We can provide access, but we often see that participants, people participating in training programs, they do not complete for various reasons, and most importantly, those reasons are linked to their social vulnerability. So, of course, there is a need to establish the kind of feedback mechanism. So to really listen to the voice of young people, and we will hear later on today, also to hear the voice of NGOs or companies. So definitely we need to acknowledge the multiplicity of learners and learning contexts. So this would be a first step. And really we need to look at these growing needs for skilling, upskilling, and reskilling. And yes, flexibility, affordability of these learning pathways. Now, Jolene, we know that, okay, with all this advice and best practices that we have already seen taking place in the EU neighborhood and Central Asia countries. So we may say that at least on the accessibility and equal opportunities, we are making some or taking some steps. What else is needed to create more positive learning experiences? What is your experience?
Yeah, so we discussed this topic as well earlier during the conference. And it was focused on what we said, like we need to create meaningful and engaging learning environments to offer positive learning experiences to all learners. And a meaningful learning environment means that the environment or the program offers relevant content in authentic context. And with relevant content, we mean content that is required by the labor market, but also addressed, like tailored to the individual needs, the personal needs for growth, to pursue ambitions, etc. On the other hand, we spoke about engaging learning environments. And with engaging learning environments, we mean environments that really invite learners to participate, to explore, to try new things, but also to make mistakes, to collaborate, and important as well, like to take ownership of their own learning. And this all needs to happen like in a safe and structured learning environment. With the examples we shared earlier this week in this discussion, we also see that there's no one answer to what a meaningful and engaging learning environment is or how it looks like. It will first of all depend on the desired learning outcomes. And are these like more formal outcomes, like included in formal qualifications, or more personal objectives? But it also depends on the learners, who are the learners, and the context in which learning takes place. So in the end, we will often see a mix of different learning activities that together will form a meaningful and engaging learning environment. And we will need this mix to address the different needs of learners, their different interests, and we will probably also need a mix to ensure that the learners in the end achieve the desired learning outcomes. So we also discussed what we need to create more of these meaningful and engaging learning environments. And I will highlight some of the topics or some of the conditions we will need to create more meaningful and engaging learning environments. One is partnerships. This, you also referred already, like We need to work together. Things are happening in different places. We need partnerships between education, the private sector, and community, but also between the different educational sectors. And we shouldn't forget the learners in this dialogue, in the discussions about what they need and how we can create these more meaningful and engaging learning environments. Another aspect was access to different types of funding. Sometimes the funding, for example, we can education, like the more formal education can use, is still limited due to regulation, and it would be good if it's possible to access different types of funding, to collaborate with other partners to create these meaningful and engaging learning environments. A culture that encourages innovation and provides space to innovation, that allows people to try something new, not for the sake of trying something new, but with the aim to improve the learning experiences and in the end, of course, the learning outcomes. One of the things that was really highlighted was also the sharing of innovative practices, and specifically like sharing on what works. What evidence do we have that a certain new form of learning really results in better learning outcomes? Too often, innovative practices remain isolated, like small little islands, and we need to connect them and to learn from them. And then one of the last things I would like to add here is that we said, okay, once we know what works in these new forms of learning, it's important to integrate it in teachers' initial training, but also continuous development to ensure that everyone gets the skills and knowledge to work with them and to implement them in the teaching and learning practice. I think these are some of our reflections to start this session. We asked you to fill in the poll at the beginning of this session. Maybe we can share the results at this point. I see one big word popping up, motivation.
Yeah, indeed, it's about motivation, and I believe when you answer to this and you think, I think it's also the motivation of learners, but also I think the motivation of all the parts or the components of the system, the motivation of stakeholders in general. And we see here also the curiosity. There are other elements of targeting and the relevance of the skills that skills programs that we provide. And I really like also this element, courage. Yeah, it takes courage to build up and to start such a difficult reform that with it's the key idea of our conference, yeah, to move away from fragmented education and training programs into a fully fledged lifelong learning system. So how can we build that? So yes, it takes courage and it takes a lot of resources as well.
Yeah, also what I like here was like knowing why it matters, like why do we need it, the usefulness. I think it counts for all actors. For the learners, you need to know why I need to learn something, or is it useful for me to learn this? Will it help me to follow my dreams, to find a new job, to have to function like in a good way to contribute to society in general. So I think we see many interesting points here, and I think it would be interesting to go also to our speakers to see whether elements we've seen here, whether we will find them as well in their answer, or maybe we will find other answers to what do people need to become active learners.
Yes, definitely. And I also want to highlight also that we have already an interaction in chat, and there are many important points that are now shared. For example, Xavier mentioned the way we learn today, the variety of forms, and also the informality, the informal context, and so on, and how the system should capture these elements. And then we have also the idea to hear another contribution on sports. Snezhana has already mentioned that the idea that an education system needs to support and recognize the lifelong learning as a function of the development of at individual level and society. So definitely we will have more time to look at these statements and to find out from our speakers. I would only like to clarify, to present the flow of the session, what it's next now. Jolene will manage the first panel discussion, which is focused on how can we broaden the access and the visibility of skills. And then in the second part of the meeting, we will go and we will discuss the policy priorities to ensure flexible and inclusive lifelong learning. So, Jolene, the floor is yours. The speakers are here, so everything is fine. Good luck.
Thank you. And you say the floor is mine, but I will not take too much space on this floor because I would like to allow the speakers to give us some more insights on what we need to ensure to broaden the access, but also the visibility of skills. And we will have 3 speakers with us this afternoon. I will introduce them one by one when I ask the first question. But in the meantime, Christina referred to it as well, we would really like to invite you to raise questions in the chat. Because after we have had the first 2 rounds of questions, we have time for some question and answering. So we are really looking forward to see your questions and to be able to address them later on. So I will start by introducing the first speaker. It's a pleasure to have with us Biljana Radonic Kerlinse. She's the Associate Director, Access to Skills and Employment, Gender and Economic Inclusion, Economics, Policy and Governance at the EBRD. And we would like to discuss to see the perspective as well of companies in our questions about broadening access and visibility of skills. And the EBRD launched its first economic inclusion strategy in 2017. And the aim of the strategy is to accelerate the transition of countries towards inclusive market economies by harnessing the power of the private sector to create economic opportunities for all. And the strategy includes 3 strategic themes: entrepreneurship and access to employment and skills, access to services that enhance economic opportunities, and so I missed
access to finance.
Yeah, and access to employment and skills. Thank you. Yeah, I was mixing two of the themes to make it more confusing. And we would like to focus on this last theme, like access to employment and skills. And what are the key elements of the EBRD strategy to broaden the access to employment and skills?
Thank you very much, Jolene. It is a real pleasure to be here today with everyone, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the question. The EBRD has indeed a rather distinctive approach as an investor, as well as a strong track record in supporting our clients, which are primarily in the private sector, to develop strategies and programs to broaden access to skills and employment for disadvantaged groups. Up until now, the bank has supported over 350 investment projects worth around 14 billion euros across all sectors and all our countries of operations to increase economic inclusion of young people, of women, of local workers in remote regions, and people with disabilities. We see economic inclusion at the heart of our mandate as we consider opening up equal opportunities as an essential building block to achieving a country's transition to sustainable market economies. Enhancing equality of opportunity and gender equality is also one of the top 3 priorities of the EBRD's strategic roadmap until 2020, alongside green economy transition and digitalization. And in this context, we look forward to stepping up our efforts as we are set to launch our new gender strategy and the new equality of opportunity strategy later this year. You mentioned our 2017 strategy that is expiring. We are working on the new strategy, which will have a broader and more holistic human capital development approach. In addition to providing financing to businesses, EBRD also provides technical assistance to help companies develop the skilled and diverse workforce, which is critical for their current and future business operations. Also, to improve access to skills and jobs, we often support our clients in offering work-based learning opportunities for young women and men in partnerships with local education institutions. We also help bring the concerns of businesses to the attention of relevant national authorities through policy dialogue and multi-stakeholder platforms on market-relevant skills development. Our activities have become even more relevant in the aftermath of the pandemic, as the COVID-19 crisis has really exacerbated existing inequalities, as we've been talking about, and reversed previous gains on inclusion, and particularly on gender equality. So we acknowledge that women are currently underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics profession. They're also likely to be disproportionately affected by technological disruptions, such as automation, which this crisis is really fast forwarding. So to improve women's access to employment and skills, we commit our clients to tackle discriminations in attracting and hiring young women, particularly in STEM fields. And we support a number of clients to strengthen their equal opportunities policies and practices, such as through diversity and inclusion action plans. And my final point is that we have intensified our work on gender equality as an institution. So gender mainstreaming has now become part of the scorecard target of our banking department, and we are very proud of that. I will stop here for now.
Thank you, Liliana. I think I really liked when you said like equal opportunities are essential building blocks. And I think it shows as well what I felt also throughout the conference. These equal opportunities are important for everyone to benefit, and a very important aspect of lifelong learning systems. And I think with my second question later on, we also get back to it, like what does it mean for companies, for the private sector? I would now propose that we first move on to one of the next speakers, and then we will do the second question after them. So for a second speaker, we have with us Fatjon Dragoshi, project manager of the Skills for Jobs project in Albania. And the Skills for Jobs project is a project of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, and the project is implemented in Albania by Swiss Contact. The project supports STEM vocational education and training institutions to establish close relations with the private sector to ensure market-oriented curricula and apply new learning methods, implement apprenticeships, and they support the institutional development. And with this first question, I would like to address the access to relevant skills, one of the themes of this first panel. And we see that in many countries, countries are revising their qualifications and curricula to ensure that they are up to date, that they cover relevant content. We also see that this is quite a challenge in this fast changing world. So based on your experiences, Fatjon, in the Skills for Job project on ensuring market-oriented curricula, what steps can be taken to ensure that training programs offer relevant skills?
Thanks, Jolene, and greetings to everyone. This is a very interesting, nice, but yet very challenging question when I think how I put my words into line. But I need to start by saying that Skills for Jobs is a project that works at provider level. And I attend many such events, and I attend many workshops and conferences in different hotel conference rooms where we discuss strategy. And once you are very inspired by the thoughtful ideas that we have and craft very nicely in documents, then you go into a school in Leja region with 500 students and you start talking to the director. And you say, you know, strategy X, Y, Z, and he says, yes, yes, yes. And then, you know, you start talking to them about actions they are doing, and then you see a bit of a disconnect. And then when you ask them, yeah, but the strategy, and they're like, what is that? And I'm not joking. So for us, it's very important to understand the context at the very nature of a territory or a locality. And based on this approach, we have come more or less to about 4 key actions that we support our partner providers to undertake. And those are a dialogue with the private sector, promoting work-based learning, teachers in and from the industry, and then the 4th, strong skills. And I'll come to each and every one of those very briefly. When we talk about dialogue with the private sector, we shall not forget that strategies are nice, but when you look at the territory, things are not maybe as advanced as one may expect. So while things do materialize, what are foreseen in the strategy, schools need to be active. And therefore, they have a big dilemma. Who is the private sector? Where are the organized business structures? And there you see a big gap. You don't have organizations of businesses who are capable to explain to certain entities what their needs for skills are. Or when you look at the skills needs assessment surveys or skills forecasts, these are very complicated exercises for economies like ours, and with the state of development of such policies. And that's why we have promoted this one-to-one business relation in between a school and companies. And that's how now partner providers have created their network of companies with whom they work in the territory to send students to apprenticeship or internships. And I come to the second element. In the apprenticeship-like scheme that we promote here in Albania with the partner providers, we are looking at the mentors as the mediator in between the business and the school. We see now companies that are different size in different realities, but they have now people who are dedicating themselves into mentoring these young students. But by doing that, they're understanding what the curricula says, what the skills that the student bring while they're studying, and that's how they can give constructive feedback to the school. And then from the school, we take it to the national agency, and hopefully that integrates in the system. A third element is having as many teachers of the school do some experience in the private sector, or possibly hire teachers, part-time assignments for people who are working in companies or in industry. And that really brings faster the needs that the industry has. And I come to the fourth, which somehow comes logically, strong skills. Most of us call them soft skills, but lately a colleague of mine whom I had a discussion with, she was saying, well, these are the only skills that remain for life, isn't it? You know, negotiation skills and all of these. So maybe those are the strong skills. And what we try to do is to integrate as much as possible of these skills in the applied curricula when the teaching, the annual teaching plans are being developed. I hope I summarized it and I didn't take too much time, Jolene.
Thank you, Fatjon. I think what we hear from your answer is like start locally at the schools, and in all your activities, we hear like the links. There are always links. We work together on activities as education and as private sector. And I really like the strong skills. No soft skills or 21st century skills, but we keep the strong skills. Thank you. So let's move from here to our third speaker in this first panel, Marcel de Leeuwen, e-learning specialist from the Netherlands. And I think we already heard also, like in the first contribution from Bejane, like the pandemic has accelerated a lot, maybe also reversed some of the progress we have made. But if we talk about e-learning or digital and online learning, I think it's really accelerated the use of it. And you work specifically on e-learning. You work as an e-learning expert on creating inspiring and powerful learning experiences. The way I translated it literally from Dutch. And during the introduction of the session, we also spoke about the different vulnerable groups. Earlier this day, we also heard like participation in adult learning, specifically by lower skilled adults, is still very low. Could you share with us your reflection on how we could use e-learning, digital and online learning to broaden the accessibility to learning opportunities for people who are less likely to engage in lifelong learning?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jolien, for the invitation to be on the panel and for your nice introduction and great question. Because we tend to think that e-learning is just a solution for businesses, for higher education, for that kind of target groups with well-occupied learners. For me, actually, it is most of the time also suitable for the less fortunate learners. For example, in Holland, we have a lot of senior citizens, of course, with a lot of bad educational experiences. And right now there is, for the last 15 years, a program to skill these senior citizens in basic IT skills. For example, to do the banking stuff on your iPad, or to communicate with your family abroad, something like that. And what I'm interested in this project, I worked there for more than 10 years, is that people are very motivated. They don't have the learning skills. They hardly have the IT skills to use computers and things like that, but they're very glad with the learning opportunities. And they don't like it because they just like learning, but it has to be authentic. It has to be valuable in their real lives. So they don't come up with really sophisticated professional development goals. They come up with very practical things. And the same thing, what I saw was in a prison. I was a learning designer for a program for inmates. They have a lot of different problems and circumstances. For example, there are a lot of illiterate people in prison. So if you come to the traditional e-learning solutions, they are pushing content and learning. You cannot force people to learn. You can invite them to learn. You can offer them possibilities, but you cannot force them. So for example, in that case, there was used a lot of storytelling, a lot of visual learning. And what we did was we created four different, we used 4 principles to create really an inclusive and motivating learning experience. And the first one, to create an open learning environment. It sounds a little bit strange in prison, but you mean you curated a lot of content, you bring in all external and internal experts, so you create an open learning environment with formal and informal learning. The second one is to create a safe learning environment, especially for these vulnerable people. So they have to be sure they can make mistakes. They have to be sure it's not in the report just after learning. It's about the learning process. So that's the second part, the safe learning environments, especially for this kind of people. The third one is the relevance. For example, with the inmates, we learn them not about sophisticated things. We learn them about language. We learn them about how to read. We learn them about social skills, because the goal was to help them build up a life outside of prison. So it has to be relevant and meaningful for them. So they learned how to think ahead, for example. And the last one is not to tell them what to do, but to give them ownership. So devolve responsibility for the learning process, and you start with a lot of help, and then you use scaffolding. And that really, really worked. And in that case, it doesn't matter if it's for people with a distance to the labor market or something else. These 4 principles really help to design meaningful learning experience and to make it not such a high-stake activity. It's really accessible.
Thank you, Marcel. And you already said at the end yourself, like you use the example of inmates, but of course these 4 principles are relevant for every learning
with every
environment.
target group. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something interesting I noted down as well from the beginning is that you mentioned, like, for those adults like still working on literacy, etc., but also having limited basic IT skills, they were still able to use the opportunities digital and online learning offers. I would now like to go back to Biliane for a second question. Also, I would still like to invite people to raise your questions in the chat, because after the second round of questions, we will have time to address your questions as well. So we heard before from you, like, what is important in your strategy, and we are also curious, like, what does it mean for your clients, the companies? What does this mean for them, and to what extent do they adopt measures to promote skills development? Are they equally willing to invest in training? And if not, what characterizes the companies that are inclined to do so? Biliane.
Thank you, Jolene. That's a very important question. Operationalization is the most important thing. I would agree with Fatih about importance of going beyond strategy and into practical implementation. But we often find that, in contrast with SMEs, which often lack capacity and, shall I say, sometimes vision, we find that mid-caps and large corporates are much more inclined to work with us as EBRD in promoting human capital development and investing in training. This is particularly true for larger and more complex companies that need to better develop their strategic workforce planning and management functions in order to respond to the future of work trends, such as aging workforce, for example. Let me take that example. We are particularly focused on supporting our clients in opening up economic opportunities for older workers, as well as for people with disabilities. And there are many entry points how to operationalize this. For example, in the past year, we have worked with a number of retail clients, food and non-food retail, to recruit, train, integrate, and retain people with disabilities and older workers throughout their business operations in Poland, in Lithuania, in Croatia, Moldova, Belarus. In addition, we have helped clients and governments in the process of adapting to technological changes, which is a constant process in the workplace, by developing national skills assessments and skills development approaches. For example, last year, in cooperation with the Jordanian Ministry of Tourism and through the work of the business-led Sector Skills Council, which EBRD helped establish, we conducted a survey of hospitality and tourism companies, which revealed that digital skills are urgently needed in the sector: e-commerce, marketing, remote working. And as the future of mass international tourism is still uncertain, the tourism sector in Jordan, which is one of the most important sectors in the countries, will need to develop the ability to provide high quality, personalized and experience-based services. So we are working now with the Jordanian government in partnership with ETF, in fact, to develop a national tourism skills development strategy with a particular key focus on enhancing digital skills. And I just, my last example is with regards to large utilities in Turkey, where we help them to promote equal opportunities and strengthen the role of women in the workforce in this male-dominated energy sector. Just one example, best practice, energy distribution company Tredash in 2020 recorded an outstanding increase in the number of women in technical roles, from as little as 4% to 25% in roughly a year. And they also increased the number of women in management roles from 10% to 15%. To achieve this, with EBRD support, the company developed a number of initiatives, including a very successful Women in Leadership training and mentorship program to advanced female employees' career progression to management roles. And we all know that care responsibilities are one of the key barriers for women's access to employment. So the company provided financial support for childcare and also a job rotation program for flexible working. And finally, to ensure a strong pipeline of female talents, the company, with EBRD support, conducted extensive outreach activities to present the sector as an attractive career option for young women in vocational schools, and also to provide gender-sensitive work-based learning opportunities for students. So I'll stop here and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Liliana, also for sharing these interesting examples and impressive increases in the participation of women in these roles, these functions. I would like to also ask a second question to Fatjon. Because with the first one, we focused on the access to relevant skills. But I also would like to focus on these new forms of learning. We discussed this earlier this week, and we emphasized like the importance of meaningful and engaging learning environments, but also in the Skills for Jobs project, you introduce new learning methods. And you already mentioned before as well the relevance of work-based learning. What elements did the Skills for Jobs project introduce or support to introduce to create more meaningful and engaging learning experiences for learners? And what are the experiences so far with these new forms?
When in the inception phase, designing the approach that Skills for Jobs would apply, as we looked very carefully into the context, we found out that there was too much dictation and teacher dictation and then student writing notes. And this was not really as attractive for the learners. And once you have that disconnect, when the student cannot follow anymore and pay attention, then all the words that we saw in the slide kind of fade away, because there could be no passion without understanding and comprehending and being able to follow, and so on and so forth. And as a result, we, in our strategy, decided to have 4 key elements. The first thing, promote online learning as part of blended learning, and then promote as heavily as we could experiential practical learning. A third element was to introduce in partner providers industry standards through companies as much as we could. And a fourth element was to promote digitalized profession programs. And I'll explain very briefly. For us, it started with developing a digital learning environment through a Moodle-based platform, and then start supporting some teachers on how to navigate and use those platforms when interacting with their students. And most importantly for us also was to support them into developing digital learning content. But to answer a bit to the second part of your question, this didn't really go very well in the first few years, because it was so difficult to get teachers out of their comfort zone and to get into e-learning, although we had provided quite a satisfactory infrastructure, I would say. But then the pandemic hit, and it changed completely the way everyone was doing business. And then everyone came to us, so to say, trying to find a solution for business continuation. And ever since, we see a great deal of positive response, be it from the teachers, but also from the students, in engaging with one another through technologies for education. And now we are very excited to see that now about 20% of the students in the system have access to digital learning content and can interact with the platform, and this is increasing every month actually. The second element was to promote practical learning, work-based learning modalities, apprenticeship-like. But there the challenge is that 90% or 91% of the companies in Albania are micro companies. And as you're working in small territories, you don't have much choice, because also you need some enlightened employers, but those who are really also willing to open their doors to the students. And this took a while, and now we are able to start selecting a bit more the companies, because the network is extending and more companies now have an interest and are showing at the doors of the schools to collaborate with them. And then introducing industry standards was very important for us, because that was an important element into building up on the attractiveness of jobs. There you have students who really find it fascinating to, I don't know, follow some Cisco courses or the likes. And I come to the last one. We were trying to make vocational education fancy, because only 18% of the youngsters choose that path versus gymnasium in Albania. unlike in most of the countries in the Western Balkans. So now we're talking about 3D printers, we're talking about e-car laboratories, and so on and so forth. So as a way to make learning as attractive and to introduce as much as possible technologies for education to steer teachers and students' passion into engaging with one another.
Thank you, Ation. I think what you say, like compared like with other Balkan countries, participation in VET in Albania is low, but there are many other countries that also face challenges with the attractiveness of VET. I also highlight from your contribution, like interaction to create engaging learning environments, not always easy, but then the pandemic helped in that regard as well. And one thing I found interesting, because Liana mentioned before, like it's especially with the bigger companies who have their strategies where it's easier to work on this inclusiveness. You also raised the challenge, like working with the small companies and to get them involved. So I think it's one of the interesting topics, challenges to discuss together. Let me move to the last question for now, and then we will have some time for questions from the chat. Marcel, from the previous two speakers, we heard about the willingness of both companies to invest in training and to work on inclusiveness, and about new forms of learning introduced, like in VET, in more formal education in Albania. But you also support companies in developing online training for their employees. Based on your experiences, what opportunities does e-learning offer to companies to better support the skills development of their employees?
Yeah, I like the question, because a lot of answers are like, okay, just offer them a lot of interactive content, really right created and engaging content. And I think that's far not enough. So it doesn't. I'm in e-learning as an educational scientist since '91, and I saw a lot of bad examples, and I created also a lot of bad examples, to be honest. But it doesn't start with the technical aspects, and it doesn't start with functionalities of a learning environment. So what I see in organizations, and that can be commercial organizations or hospitals, especially during the COVID times, it doesn't start with pedagogical issues, it doesn't start with technical things, it starts with perspective on the talent development and the value of learning within your organization. And from commercial organizations, but also from non-profit, it is actually the same. They want to improve the performance of their people, and they want to improve the happiness and the safety of their people and the outcome with their customers, for example, if it's a commercial organization. So what I see is that a lot of, it starts with a different view on learning. And what we see in organizations all over the world is that there's a shift going on, and away from the learning content itself and the learning process with the tracking and the checking the boxes and things like that, more the focus on the learning outcome and the performance of people. And one of the examples in hospitals at this moment is a methodology based on skills, and it's called entrusted professional activities. So it's all about skills. And it's like a framework, a theoretically framework, but it's also integrated with a technical solution. So what it offers is a really flexible way of learning, a very personalized way of learning. And it's completely different with the old view. So you need a holistic view on learning and development. And even in these times, if you know, I have to let some people go because we don't have the opportunity to hire them anymore. Even then you see that organizations want to invest in learning to outplace them, for example. So for that holistic view, you can really use e-learning, because e-learning can be create a really powerful blend of different interactions, different systems. And you can come up with personalized learning with dashboards. and you create what we called a learning ecosystem with formal, informal learning, synchronous, asynchronous learning. And that can be very powerful because on every different level in the organization, it can support the learning process. It can create communities, it can create connections between people. Because learning is, of course, not only individual learning, the old-fashioned way of doing e-learning. So it's more holistic view with all the systems in place. And it means also think about use of open badges for certifications. So if you have a certification in one organization and you go working in the other organization, you can bring it with you in an e-portfolio, for example. So that makes it more flexible and more focused also on the individual professional instead of the organization only. I think that's really what we can, well, facilitate by using e-learning, because nowadays we have things like learning standards to interchange between organizations. We have things like open badges for the previous acquired competencies, for example. You can transfer them from one organization to the other one. You can really focus on what do I have to learn to perform. So I think e-learning can really make a difference in a new fashioned way from a holistic point of view.
Thank you. It sounds like we have a full toolbox with digital instruments to make
The
learning.
technical things are there already, so it's the mindset that we need now.
And also what I like to see in the different contributions, like you also mentioned this holistic approach, but you also started like, what do those companies want to achieve, but also their employees, and about talent development. And I also heard that in the first contribution from Biljana on the what is in there for the companies. Everyone feels the need, like we need to keep developing for different reasons, and we need to find ways to address the individual needs and to support everyone to develop him or herself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we took slightly longer than we planned, but I think we still have some time for questions, don't we, Christina?
Definitely, and I want to make time for this interaction. And actually, I propose to change a bit the approach. Not me reading out the comments and the questions we have in chat. I would like to give the floor to those who posted their reflections, and at the end to give also a chance to our speakers to briefly react. So I would start with Lida, our colleague, who is very much involved in this cooperation with the EBRD, and she posted already some reflections. Then I propose to give the floor to Snezana from Serbia, and then to my colleague Xavier as well. So Lida, the floor is yours, please.
Thanks, and hello to everybody now. But I wanted to be a little bit provocative now, and I put the buzzwords that we put now, the institution. When I first met EBRD in 1991, you would have never found those words on education and skills in all the documents. And I have a copy, Biljana, of the first time. And on the other hand, when I was working with the World Bank, you would have never had this discussion of private sector on the skills, no? Apart from the private education and provision. So my point is that it's the world in change, the conceptualization in change, and all institutions have understood that none can do something alone. And it's a beautiful thing to read all these documents now of this, and even EBRD today. It's all about skills. It's all about qualification framework. It's all about teacher training, work-based learning. And you'd say, have they copied TTF? No, this used to be our words, no? But it's with our cooperation and strong cooperation, we come much, much stronger with the government. And we have cases, at least I can talk for the cases of Turkey, and where with the EBRD team and the private sector, we really work on all these issues in a cohesive and a joint. This morning we had with employers, and Biljana knows them, Turk track, and they made a presentation of how they are working on skills for impaired individuals. Before, you wouldn't have thought of it. And it's all about the innovation, technology provision, and all the designs of teaching and learning. So the plea is that the knowledge for teaching and learning doesn't belong only to the educationalist. No, it belongs to everybody, and it's based on the individual and the community needs for in a lifelong learning. So thank you, Biljana, again for our great cooperation, and I've learned a lot. And so looking forward.
Thank you, Lida. Yes, Biljana, I will give you at the end of this tour a few minutes to give your feedback. Now let's move to Snežana Krašnja from Serbia. Snežana, you mentioned 2 points about the 4 principles that Marcel mentioned. You like them very much, and also the fact that learners should benefit from the curriculum. Would you have further reflections on that, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I was impressed with all these inputs given to all of us. And I was working many years as someone who is working with teachers, students, and others. So my experience is that we have in Serbia very good system of professional development of teachers, and they can go to the different seminars, programs to have the better knowledge. But the system recognized these things. They can have the better salary and better recognition, like some kind of the title. They are specialists for that and that, and it's important for them that someone see their efforts to learn much more and to give that knowledge, skills to their students. If you're talking about the teachers also, I think that if you give them the program or curricula which is only theoretical, then you can have a problem. So they need something which they can use for the challenges in the classroom, and they want to learn from their peers. It is important also if you're talking about other learners, youth and others, it's important to have the curricula according to their needs. It is like you are in prison, as we heard, then you have another challenges which you have in your life. So you must adapt the curricula according to the needs of the learners.
Thank you, Snežana, a very important message. Now we move to my colleague Xavier. He made a point about the bad experiences, and I think this is very important for what Fatjona has said. Xavier?
Yeah, thank you, Christina. No, my question is that you mentioned a couple of times this issue of bad experience, or for people with low skills or more vulnerable groups having had bad experiences in the past. Very often these bad experiences are related with the moment of assessing their learning and exams and this kind of thing. So my question is if you can give some good examples of how to make this assessment of learning in a way that is really formative and motivating them to continue learning, and at the same time helping them to afterwards validate these skills and competences for further learning.
Thank you, Xavier. It's an extremely point, and also just to talk about my own experience, I'm very, under pressure. My kids will have to, my youngest daughter have to pass next week very important exams, and you cannot imagine the pressure on pupils and students now passing these exams, sitting these exams during the pandemic and after 1 year and a half of pandemic. So really, this is an important point, the assessment and the impact on the attractiveness of learning. Now, back to you, Biljana, Marcel, and Fatjona. Any last words from your side and feedback to these points? Very, very briefly, please.
I would just like to say how important, I completely agree with Lida, how important the partnerships are and how important it is to bring together private sector, governments, international organizations, educationists, and skills development is not only the responsibility of educationists. I fully agree with that. And we really appreciate our partnership with ETF, which has brought us an enormous amount of knowledge, expertise, experience that we can apply to support our clients. And I think that there was a big shift from MDGs to SDGs, from Millennium Development Goals, if you remember, when there was no private sector mentioned, to SDGs, where it's all about how much funds we need to raise and private sector investing in skills, etc. So we've come a long way. It seems that ETF was ahead of its time, and we're all kind of catching up now with you guys. But just just a final point, importance of a joined up approach at the government level. We shouldn't only be talking about ministries of education. We should talk about Ministry of Economy, ministries of various sectoral ministries, various ministries of innovation, regional development, etc. This is a topic which cross-cuts across all different parts of economy, and the importance of building ecosystems. It is easy for large companies to do some of these things. They have the money, they have the expertise, they have the long vision. It's the SMEs that we need to care for, and they can only do this if they have a strong supporting ecosystem that they can tap into in order to improve their skills. So I will stop here.
Yeah. Thank you, Biljana. Patjon.
Thanks. I would like to once again reinforce the idea that there has to be a lot of effort put by so many different actors to ensure that businesses go to schools and schools goes to business, because that is the only way how we can hope that we create enough good practices that will then disseminate those good experiences to others who will be more proactively trying new things. And I think that's the key thing here, reinventing ourselves as we go.
Thank you, Patjon. Marcel.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Well, I love the question from Xavier in the chat. For me, it comes back to take our learners serious. Me as an educational scientist, I'm used to create learning opportunities from my desk. And I talk to some learners and then I'm going to create something beautiful and smart. Stop with that. Think about the learners and devolve the responsibility to the learners. Help them with it. Co-create learning solution with them, not for them only, with them, because they're really competent in doing that. And it also connects to the question of Xavier about assessment and things like that. Let them measure the skills themselves or with their peers. For me, that's really a very powerful way of acting and moving forward. Instead of, as experts, as we are all together, create something for our audience. I think we have to let that loose. Learning is about fun and engagement and things like that, and we need the learners for that, also in the design.
Definitely. Learning is about us, individuals. Thank you. Jolene, one last word from your side.
What I just get from this session again, especially this last point, is like it's a joint effort. And I think we all see what is needed. We all have our ambitions to support lifelong learning, to help building this system that will support lifelong learning. And we have to do it with all of us. So we need to find each other and we shouldn't forget about the learners. Thank you for all your contributions, Biljana, Patjon, Marcel. I think we heard different perspectives, but it also showed that the different perspectives are very interlinked. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolene. And I would like to now to share with you a secret. Myself and Jolene, before this meeting, we decided to allow more time to discussion and interaction. So yes, we are a bit behind the schedule, but I think that's not a problem. And my proposal now is, unfortunately, to skip the break. We wanted to have a 5 minutes break, but I would say that for the sake of continuing the discussion and, you know, using the excellent points we had in session 1, to have them also for the session 2, is to continue now with the session 2, if you agree with that. We have prepared 2 videos for you, but I think we will broadcast them after the meeting. You'll find them on our platform, so there is no problem to move now to the second panel. And now it is my pleasure to invite our guests. The first one is from the European Commission, Ms. Alison Crabb. She's head of unit coordinating the area of skills and qualification in DG employment. I'm also pleased to announce that we will have also Ms. Snezana Klašina, the Minister Advisor in the Ministry of Youth Sport of Republic of Serbia, as well as Mr. Raimo Vorinen, Dr. Vorinen, who is Associate Professor at the Finnish Institute of the Educational Research of the University of Jyväskylä, but he is also the chair of the board of International Center for Career Development. So now it is my pleasure to open the discussion now with Ms. Alison Crabb. We know that we live through such amazing times, such challenging times, and we know as well that the European Union has adopted a lot of, put forward a lot of ambitious targets, priorities in the area of skills. So just to mention the new European skills agenda, the renewed one, and the fact that we have ambitious objectives there, and really the focus is on lifelong learning and the focus is on individuals. It was exactly what was also underlined in the first session. So the focus is on how individuals benefit from all these lifelong learning opportunities. So the skills agenda also underlines, and we know that you have a lot of work on making more flexible or pushing for a flexible learning arrangement and flexible learning pathways. And we discuss a lot about micro-credential, individual learning accounts, and all these aspects. So we would like from you to understand what is the flexibilization, what is the flexibilization, what it means to make flexible learning pathways. What are, in your opinion, and from your experience looking at 27 EU member states, what are the key ingredients for flexible learning pathways? Please, Ms. Crabb.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thanks for the kind introduction, and thanks to all for such an enjoyable and interesting session so far. I'm finding it very interesting. I think, and this is a great question to pursue with, this question of flexible learning pathways, because what has struck me in our discussion so far this afternoon is the focus that everyone is putting on meaning for each of us as an individual learner. And I think for that really to be operationalized, what we're talking about is making it possible for each individual learner to follow a flexible learning pathway. In other words, really, being able to engage with learning throughout life in any kind of learning environment, being able to give that learning a trusted value for whatever purpose we're learning. We often talk about the labour market, of course, tremendously important, but also very much aware that there's other reasons, motivations for learning. And all of those really should come together in a meaningful learning pathway for the individual. So I think it's a great angle to come at the question from. Actually, Jolene, in introduction to this afternoon session, I thought did a great job of kind of mapping out the landscape, and it's a really busy landscape of factors that need to be in place for these flexible learning pathways to succeed. I would just maybe focus on a few points which are high on our policy agenda right now when it comes to EU cooperation. And the first one, and really the fundamental one, is this issue of learning outcomes. So using learning outcomes as a common language, a way of talking about learning skills and qualifications. And this is so important, and I'm sure it's come up in previous sessions throughout this week. It's really, I would describe it as the bedrock of all of this, because only if we talk and think in terms of learning outcomes, what a learner knows, understands, and is able to do, are we going to be able to design joined up and flexible pathways that really accommodate learning from all different environments and take us further on either career or learning pathways? So I think learning outcomes as the kind of vocabulary that we need to use, and you will all be very familiar, I'm sure, with the European qualifications framework, learning outcomes underpinning that, all the work in the area of qualifications reform. Other point maybe to say a few words on is guidance and validation, because another topic of course, not only for those in the lower skilled trap, those who are most in need of engaging with learning, but actually for all of us at any skill level, is a question of really giving a trusted value, giving the right value to the skills that we've acquired after initial education and training. Hence the importance of the work on validation of non-formal, informal learning that's continuing at EU level. Last year, we completed a look into progress since 2012. In 2012, of course, recommendation at EU level on making validation a reality. In a nutshell, yes, there's progress. I think certainly progress can be found in every single member state, but it's also true to say that we're very far from a situation in which validation is the norm for people, and that's of course the goal. So validation in this landscape, and hand in hand with that, of course, lifelong guidance, not one-shot access, perhaps in your final year at school to a guidance counsellor, but guidance is an integral part of your learning throughout life. So I'll stop there, and I hope to come back later, notably on individual learning accounts, which I think and I hope can also be part of this this picture. Thanks, Christina.
No, actually, Alison, I think we would like to continue now the discussion with you, because also we have a second question for you, and I would like to pose it now. For the sake of, continuation of your argumentation. And yes, indeed, the individual learning accounts are a big, how to say, not a mystery, but something that it's not yet fully, understood. And we need to raise the awareness, and also need to build the trust in this aspect. And for example, the European Training Foundation has launched now an investigation, a small survey on to assess and to look at the level of awareness on the challenges that certain countries or policymakers perceive about this flexibilization. So please continue with quick points on the individual learning accounts. And then in this vein, I would also like to underline, all of us, we know that this recovery, the economic recovery, is quite difficult. We don't know when and how it fully will start after this pandemic. And we also are under pressure of these transitions, twin transitions, digital and greening, that are not only in the EU, but they are already prominent in the EU neighborhood countries and Central Asia as well. So therefore, maybe please also tell us a bit about the policy priorities of the European Union in this context, and what kind of instruments you'd like to promote more to make education and training more flexible and accessible. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Yes, well, let's start then with the individual learning account, because that's exactly one instrument that we're exploring right now, and trying to understand experience across member states and beyond EU member states of what might be the features of an individual learning account approach that can indeed, open up these flexible learning pathways. I would say we're trying with this concept to really tackle two things. One is reaching people who have let me call it a looser relationship with their employer. So indeed, they may be unemployed or inactive, they may be self-employed, they may be one of the many people right now in part-time or short-term work, or the small but growing number of platform workers. So something like 4 in 10 people in the labour market right now, by our calculation, could be broadly considered to be an atypical work. 40% of people who are likely at risk of not being covered by what in many countries are very well-functioning, well-established systems for training of people in full-time employment. So closing those gaps, that's one thing that we're interested in doing. Maybe perhaps even more fundamentally, though, is for all individuals engaging with learning to explore the idea of whether an individual learning account can really help create the change of mindset and empowerment, which is so important. And I know this has been a topic throughout the week, and all of us engaged in this field know it. It's also about effecting a real cultural change that each individual understands that he or she has the possibility to keep learning throughout life, and has the opportunities to do that in a way that is meaningful for them. So the elements of an individual learning account, I always say in introduction that the title is perhaps a bit misleading, because the account or the entitlement is one thing, and that's absolutely fine. But of course, it's the landscape around and the learning ecosystem, as we've been saying this afternoon, around it, which will actually make it work. So what do we find in a strong skills and learning ecosystem? We find access to validation as the norm. We find lifelong guidance. We find easy access to quality assured training opportunities, probably something like a national registry, probably put together with strong input from social partners. We find things like functioning paid leave arrangements for people in employment. So when we're talking with this kind of shorthand title of individual learning account, first thing to say is that we're going beyond the account or the entitlement itself. So we're aiming, by the end of this year, the Commission is aiming to put forward a proposal, as I say, based on evidence and understanding of the different parts of how that type of model can work. Other policy parts in the equation then, I want to always remind of the important work still going on the so-called upskilling pathways, or what the Commission originally proposed as skills guarantee, nowadays known as the upskilling pathways, but reaching out to those who don't have at least an upper secondary level of basic skills, reading, writing, digital, to help them through skills scans or skills audits, if you like, guidance, tailored opportunities and validation, to build that fundamental starting point for going further in their learning. So upskilling pathways remains really very important. We'll be evaluating next year progress on that, reporting to member states in about 12 months' time. So that's another part of the equation. Perhaps the last quick word is on the micro-credentials then, and this comes back to the idea of using the language of learning outcomes to respond to a real diversification, give a trusted value to very diverse forms of capturing learning. We would like to bring, a little bit like the EQF, would like to bring better transparency and shared understanding by putting forward some standards at European level for those micro-credentials. They're booming year on year, but at the moment, certainly some might feel it's a bit of a jungle. What can we do together at EU level to bring more trust and more transparency to that? And maybe last word, and I know it's been a topic also, is we can call it a holistic approach, we can call it combating fragmentation, and that continues in this field of adult skills development to be really a fundamental point that we're trying to tackle together with the member states. Joining the dots, aligning efforts beyond education and training policy, whether it's labour market policy, social, regional development, industry, etc., etc. All of that, as you said, Christina, now under the motto of the green and digital transitions, which together with COVID have just pressed the accelerator on skills development. We knew that those needs were there. We see them increasingly in the spotlight since the last 18 months. So all of our efforts now very much steering in that direction and looking into how to open up learning opportunities for both of those transitions. So maybe I'll leave it there. I'm looking forward to hearing from the other speakers also. Thank you for the invitation to join the panel.
Thank you, Ms. Crabb. Yes, excellent points. And actually, I want to share from practice what we see also in our countries, the lack of flexibility or incomplete development of national qualification frameworks, or all this element of flexibilization, micro-credential, recognizing the potential of these kind of very short-term skills development programs, actually impede and block the access of job seekers and people with low level of education or obsolete qualifications to further training. So it's a loss, it's an immense loss of opportunities. Yeah. So now, thank you very much, Ms. Crabb. Now I think there are extremely interesting points, and now I think it makes a lot of sense now to move to one of our partner countries, Serbia, who is one of the leaders, in innovation, in working on this fragmentation that you just mentioned, Ms. Crabb. So working on the fragmentation and building sectorial approaches, holistic sectorial approaches to a problem that it's growing now. We see in the pandemic as well. So the youth integration on the labor market through skills development to career guidance and so on. So it's my pleasure now to invite Ms. Snježana Klažna, the advisor of the Minister of Youth and Sport in the Republic of Serbia. We have collaborated a lot. Snježana, if I can say, you are a champion of promoting the youth policies in your country. So therefore, I really am grateful that you are here with us and that you can share your experience and advices when it comes to youth integration. So you tested a lot, you had a lot of policy approaches, you have also assessed these programs, and you looked at their outcomes and results. So we would like to know what works. What is your experience in promoting inclusive policies to skills development or career orientation, and as well job opportunities for young people? What is your experience in Serbia? Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for inviting me, and thank you to all panelists and others participants. I think that Serbia is one of the examples how can coordination mechanisms can be put in a field, and that's the reason why I will now talk a little bit about the youth in Serbia. So the Ministry of Youth and Sports, together with other ministries and together with the business sector and the youth organizations, because it's important all of us to be on the same way, put a lot of the activities to ensure that young people acquire skills in the labor, which are required in the labor market, support the transition of young people from education to the labor market, of course, and with focus of young people who are at risk of the social exclusion. A key factor, I think, and important if we are talking about the young people, is informing. So to informing young people, that means counseling, professional guidance, as well as training for active job research. In collaboration with the civil society organizations and the local youth offices, we have 140 local youth offices in Serbia and 1,070 youth organizations who are dealing with the youth issue. We have developed various youth support mechanisms that contribute to the development of the skills for better employability, self-employment, and entrepreneurship. The first step was, of course, the strategy of career guidance and counseling, which was adopted in Serbia in 2010, so 11 years before. And today, career guidance and counseling is included in strategic and legal documents in the field of the education, field of the employment, and of course, the field of the youth. An important step in the system of quality assurance has been made by adopting the rule book on the standards of career guidance and counseling. It was in 2019. And we have, of course, Euro Guidance Center, and career guidance and counseling, of course, is one of the main basic instruments of the human resource developments, which achieve both education goals and economic goals, but also the social equity and inclusion goals. A successful economy requires individuals to adapt quickly. We saw that and easily to the changing needs of the world around them, but also to know and to be able to manage those changes. For example, for the implementation of the national strategy for youth in the last 6 years, more than 800 projects were adopted. But it's important that when we are approving the project, special attention is given to the equity, to the gender equity, and to the young people from vulnerable groups. In the criteria, we put also this kind of the things which we think are good. Where we are looking on the data, Eurostat data for youth, and in 2019 we can see that the unemployment rate of the young people aged 15-29 in European Union was 11.9. Today, in 2022, it's 13.2, probably from the COVID pandemic issue. In Serbia, in 2011, it was 21.5. Now it's 20.5. That means it decreased. So we are satisfied with these trends. But despite this progress, youth unemployment in Serbia is still far higher than the European Union, and of course, average is almost twice as high as the working age population. So we must put much more effort in that. If you're talking about the gender issue, the main problem in Serbia is not so much in employment or unemployment, but in self-employment, because about 23% of the self-employment are women. So we must put much effort to do on that issue. Of course, that we have a lot of the programs and projects, especially with the GIZ and the European IPA funds also, which help us to have the better results. I would like only to mention one, and to finish for this first question. I think that it's important, if we are talking especially with youth, to ask them and to put them as the real decision makers together with the government representatives. So the example is the project, Youth Lab project of the Regional Cooperation Council situated in Sarajevo, and the two government representatives together with the youth representatives make one big project, how to have the better employability and self-employment of the young people. And we put the goals together, and all decisions were made together, how to develop the policy coordination system in the youth guarantee, because the Serbia is preparing to involve in the youth guarantee as even we are not the member of the European Union, to raise awareness of young people on the importance of career management and career management skills, and of course to promote and develop the entrepreneurial skills with youth also. So that's for the last time.
Thank you, Snezhana. Indeed, the career management, empowering young people to act for their, to the self-development and take up all the skills opportunities, development opportunities they have. It's an important aspect. We posted already in chat the report, an interesting report that it has been completed last year with your excellent support. And there actually it's exactly what you mentioned, the idea of the fact that young people are also self-employed, that there are these new forms of employment that are rather atypical, that they require a special treatment, as also in terms of policies and opportunities. We also witness that not only in Serbia, but everywhere, this increase in telemigration, let's call it like that. So young people working online and digital platform for foreign employers. So all these new employment forms are really demanding career guidance, exactly what you mentioned, close counseling and tailored support. Now, my next question looks into rather sensitive aspect, the fact the young people who are exposed to social risk, to inactivity. So this category of young people not in employment, education and training, we know that it's very diverse in terms of education, of labor market readiness, and also social background. We also know that the European Commission now and the European Union in general is it's encouraging the countries from the Western Balkans to develop youth guarantee approaches and so on. So looking at this diversity in terms of profile of needs population, we know that policies work best if they are well designed and meet the needs of and the challenges of local communities as well. Yeah, not only individuals. So from your experience, what works in reaching out to vulnerable young people? And do you say that there is a role for skills development as well in this, in helping these young vulnerable groups?
Thank you very much also for these questions. But first of all, I would like to thank ETF for this study of the youth position in Serbia, which is very good done. And also in this study is mentioned that one of the priority must be to work with the people, young people in the need category. So that's also the results, and to put that in the practice. According to the data, we know that the need category is very, very much in a problem with how to be how to involve them in the real life, how to ensure that they have the job, how to put them to the lifelong learning, and how to come to them, because as I mentioned in the previous questions, the informing is very important. So what are we doing? We as the Ministry of Youth and Sport use the local youth offices there in the region of Serbia, and they have local coordinators and also the civic organizations, youth organizations together to come to those young people who are in the need category, but also to those who are not motivated to participate, active in the society, because they can the young people live in some space, and the space is local space, so they can reach them better than we from the national level. So it's the one of the approach, and also it's important, if you're talking development of the skills, to give them a chance also, like all others young people, to develop the personal skills needed for the lifelong learning, of course, digital entrepreneurial skills, learning to learn communication, and to be self-confident. That's also very important for them, because it's usually that they do not believe in themselves. So they go to their home and not to think how they can be involved in the society. And we have another approach. So because last year, the government of Serbia established a special ministry for out of the towns. That means for the village. And the need category is just much more. We have the much more people, youth from that category living in the village. So we try to help them together with that ministries. And we have the special programs which will start in 2001 with the support of the GIZ and German government, talking of the perspectives of the youth in the rural area in Serbia. And when we're talking about the need category, we can also see, according to the data, that we have the less problem, of course, in the Belgrade region, but the main problem is in the southeast Serbia region, also with that category. So based on the several studies and the researches, we think that it's necessary to establish a comprehensive system of collecting data on the coverage of young people without work experience who are involved in various programs, and to further improve the capacity of the civil society and local offices to help also them together with the government. And we plan to piloting this approach in the Youth Guarantee Program because we have the new strategy for employment, and the first time we have the 3 years strategy action plan for the employment, and the special packet for the youth also in that.
Thank you, Snezhana, and also I thank you also to you and your colleagues, and also the colleagues in the statistical office in Serbia, because you mentioned an important point, the last one, the data. Yeah, and collection of data about the policies, the provision of access, and also the effects and so on. And it was actually thanks to you and the excellent system of data collection that is there, and the surveys you have already implemented in fully, how to say, harmonized with the Eurostat. We were able to look at the vulnerabilities using the survey on income and living conditions, and to look at the skills dimension, the mismatch, the role of a low income household, and how it impacts the young people transition to work and so on. So now you mentioned also career guidance aspect, and the fact that we need to build the self-confidence of young people. So I think that's a great intro for the next speaker. And at the end of this contribution from your side, we will also have time for few quick questions and remarks from the participants. So now it's my pleasure to move to Raimo. Thank you very much, Snezhana. So we move to Mr. Vuorinen, and we want now to tap into your absolutely great experience in the career guidance building system. You belonged you worked in this field for years, so we really want to hear from you. We know that we are witnessing tremendous, challenges and changes on the labor market, a lot of changes in the education system and the way we learn. And Carmo, my colleague, said a great word there. We should refer to us as learners, not to refer to as a third party, the learners. We are the learners, so all of us. So we know that also we are facing social challenges. So more than ever, the learning should be accessible and agile, the issue of flexibility and so on, and also the outcomes recognized, regardless the moment and the format of learning. So tell us a bit, what is the role of the lifelong guidance systems in these flexible learning environments, please?
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and the invitation for this event and very lively discussions. So after listening to this discussion, I have really difficulties to answer your questions, because of what I would like to say, that the more flexibility we have in learning environments, there's the more need and demand for guidance services. But the problem which I was facing immediately, you were saying, the question was that what is the role of lifelong guidance systems in flexible learning environment? And now we have been listening to terminology, what was like, there were partnerships, access, innovations, engagement, informal and formal learning, and I should talk about lifelong guidance system. So first I would like to say that I would like to change my language, so I'm not talking about lifelong guidance systems, and also the what is a lifelong guidance system in a flexible learning environment. So I would like to change the question that what is the locus where guidance related issues are related in learning, in flexible learning environments, and sort of what is it like, what's guidance like as a feature of flexible learning. So that implies that we need to change the way how we talk about guidance, and also what type of terminology we are using, although some have a long tradition and we have a set of mind, previous set of mind that we need to change as well, in accordance with the discussions and discourse what we have been listening about learning. So, and also Ms. Grab was talking about learning outcomes. So I should talk about also shift the focus from from guidance suppliers to users and individuals who are engaging in guidance. So what are the outcomes of guidance? And based on the previous experience and also the work that has been conducted in a number of countries, we know that guidance has a crucial role in lifelong learning and flexible learning environment. So to answer briefly the question, I would say that guidance is the heart of flexible learning environments. And to sort of elaborate this a little bit further, I would start the questions and the outcomes. So the lifelong is crucial point. And from individual perspective, the outcomes are the skills which Ms. Glasner was saying, that we are learning the Kerriman-Smith skills, and like a strong skill, how we can identify goals for ourselves, drive, identify the signals that I need to sort of take into account when I'm thinking of my position in my individual learning path. So for young people in education at school, it provides an opportunity to develop the skills and set visions and develop the skills which I'm using in successful transitions. And for adults, either in employed, self-employed, or working in gig economy, it's sort of one way to identify what are my current skills and where there's a need to upskill and reskill, and how I can identify learning goals for myself, which then have some labor market relevance and future relevance. So it's not only for unemployed, it's for employed, but also for self-employed, and also the aging people who are then moving to different transitions. And then if we think of the training provider, then it's sort of lubricant that makes the training provision, is it say, efficient, and it also takes into account the needs, competence needs in the labor market, and now especially in the recovery. But then we come to the locus. So, and also the formal and informal guidance. And what we were listening to the use of digital technology or use of technology in creating learning environments. But this has also impact for guidance, that the individuals and young people and adults have access to same information what we have when we are providing the learning and training opportunities. And then when they have also possibilities to create knowledge and have new type of presence in social media or in different platforms, the career discussions or discussions which relate to career take place with or without the help of practitioner. So we need to have skills, how we perform there, how we introduce ourselves, how we evaluate the information and the relevance of information. So total new type of skills which relate to career. And one last comment is also now I'm coming to our language. When we have been talking about training and education, then that's the organizational language and supplier word, and learning is the citizen language or the user word. Now, when we provide guidance, it's hard to difficult to have equivalent word that describes the ownership and engagement of the learning, like in learning and thinking about future. So my colleague Jana Kettunen has created the word co-careering, which means the new type of discourse and sort of reflections of future with community members, or discussions about career-related issues with community members. And then guidance is not something we provide. We have a new type of presence in the discourse. And that's why I'm saying that guidance is in the heart of a lifelong or flexible learning environments.
Definitely, Raimo. It's there, and we really need to reinvent ourselves as learners, but also to reinvent the whole set of classifications, definitions, and also the policies elements that we are operating with. Now, I think we anticipated a lot of some answers also for my second question, but let's summarize now. In your opinion, what are the key policy ingredients that would facilitate an inclusive and fit for purpose career guidance? And I stop here. I will not mention any more system. So, you know.
I think when I was talking about informal guidance, but it's formal guidance as well. So we have to think it as a sort of a part of the social justice issue, and also the social contract, what is provided by policymakers or by public organizations, as we have heard that people have different readiness and different opportunities and different access to service. So it's one way to promote the equal opportunities. So the first thing what we have learned from the different countries is that there's not one model, but we can have some features or ingredients, like you said. So one key issue is the joint understanding of the current paradigm of guidance and how guidance needs to transform in the similar way like we are transforming the learning opportunities. So shifting the focus on outcomes and having equivalent concepts for that. Then guidance is a policy of its own right, but it's also connected to employment, education, social and youth policy. So to get a mandate for this and sort of rationale why we need to invest on guidance, that's important. And then when it's fragmented, we have heard partnerships and those on, we need strong national leadership and coordination, like an entity who is responsible for the coordination and leadership, like a representative structure. Then we need to take into account that we need to integrate career education into national educational system. So thinking guidance and career management skills as an explicit learning outcome of educational system. So that's sort of a skill what the individuals need throughout their life. Then providing teacher training for practitioners, continuous training, but training for the managers of educational systems as well. Then quality assurance, what Mr. Klasner was saying, and then through professionalized service and continuous improvement based on the evidence. And finally, the use of technology is crucial, not only to provide services, but creating a digital ecosystem that sort of integrates and brings the elements together. And within these policies, we need to think access, the quality of information and the labor market information, real-time information, skills of the individual practitioners, and how we integrate this system. And we have a lot of materials to build on. So within European countries, we have been working a number of years together, and ETF and ILO just published a report. And within the forthcoming weeks, there's a sort of joint statement of the international organizations of the importance of guidance. So these are building blocks which the countries can use when they develop their systems.
Definitely, and also in ETF, we have committed already to spread the word, because we see that the impact of pandemic, it was devastating, if I can say, not only on the individuals, but also on the intermediaries, the labor market intermediaries, not having the proper information on the labor market and not providing counseling, because they simply did not have access to that, or they were not really. So yes, it's a lot. We will continue this discussion. We will have in autumn as well, and maybe my colleague Florian will mention that. This continuous work on career guidance system and so on. I thank you, Raimo, very, very much. Now I pass quickly the floor to Jolene to see the reactions, feedback, and questions.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting discussion. We have some questions. We also have very limited time, but shall we just invite to hear what the questions are? Like I follow your example, Christina. I learn every day. I would like to invite the participants to ask their questions. And my colleague Carmo Gomez says the first question. Can I invite you to ask the question? If you're here, otherwise I will.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Yes, Jolien and Christina, thank you. My question, in fact, is related to the presentation of Alison and this discussion on the national qualification frameworks, because we are discussing a lot about flexibility and inclusiveness. And sometimes when we discuss about the qualifications frameworks, we think about this instrument as a very inflexible and very rigid and static instrument. But as we have also discussed yesterday in the session of Skills for All, the NQFs, the National Qualification Frameworks, are now enablers of flexible systems, because they enable this approach of learning outcomes-based curricula and learning outcomes-based provision. So my question is how we can make this more visible for the countries, for the policymakers, that they can embed in their national systems the national qualifications framework as a tool for increasing flexibility. That's my question. And then in the discussion, because Raimo also mentioned it, I was very much triggered by this issue of terminology and what are the names that we use for things. And in fact, for instance, when we talk about blockchain, individual learning accounts, learning outcomes, we are talking about things among education experts. For the people out there that want to engage in learning pathways, they don't understand what we are talking about. So I would leave this as a reflection for building inclusive lifelong learning systems. How can we translate all our jargon and technical terminology in things that people can really make sense of it and can use in their learning pathways? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmo. I know that there are two more questions related to career guidance, both from Xavier and Florian. Maybe I can ask you to briefly raise your question, and then we can finish with a small reflection, very short reflection from our speakers. Florian, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hello, Jolene. Hello, colleagues. It was really interesting following you today. Raimo mentioned already, and I just put it into the chat now, this new ILO ETF report on developing career development support systems. What Raimo didn't mention, that he also participated in that. So thank you for that, Raimo. A quick question for our speaker from Serbia. So ETF just did a country fact sheet on career guidance on Serbia, and we know that you really have good systems in the country. What I wondered, what is your experience in supporting career guidance for the new self-employed, the platform workers, those kind of new professions? That would be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian, for raising your question. Xavier, before we go back to the speakers, would you like to?
Yes, I have just two small questions. One is for Raimo, which he has already somehow replied, but I think it's just to to elaborate a little bit more this issue of young people trust a lot on their networks of young friends in the social media. So how to take decisions on their learning and their career, and so how really the career and the guidance systems can and services can use this reality of young people in order to provide accuracy of information and so on. The other thing is a question for the Serbian representative on the issue of the mobility schemes. This is something that has been developed for training, and if you can explain us what is your experience in Serbia on the use of these, and how this actually is a tool to promote individual pathways, and what are the problems afterwards to recognize all this into formal certification.
Thank you for sharing your questions, Vivi. I know it's 1 minute to 4 and we should finish at 4. We will probably not make it, but can I ask you, all of the speakers, to give just a brief first answer to the question? It doesn't need to be complete. Hopefully we can continue the discussion another time. Alison, can I ask you to start, invite you to start?
Sure, thank you. And on the question of learning outcomes, I've posted something in the chat there. I think, you know, my final thought would be that we talk, as you know, people engage with policy making, about holistic and integrated systems, and that's fine. When we look through the lens of a learner, we can also actually talk about having we can call it, you know, a joined up experience. So living within a landscape which allows us step by step to, you know, move from initial education and training, further learning, validation of our learning, accompanied by guidance, tailored experiences for us, meaningful for us. So actually, you know, it just struck me in this afternoon session, we can either look through the system lens, the individual lens, but in fact, what we're always talking about is an integrated approach working in a joined up system, which is often a bit, you know, kind of dry sounding for policymakers. But when we translate that into outcomes for the individual, then of course it becomes, you know, an exciting focal point.
We take the individual as starting point. Thank you for your answer. Susanna, can I invite you to briefly reflect on the questions?
Of course, Jolien. First of all, thank you for the questions. The last one about how can we have the career guidance for those who are just employed. So we have a very good Chamber of Commerce in Serbia, and they have the special department for career guidance and give all the support and train for those who just put to be employees. So this is the part of the career guidance and counseling, not only for those who are not in the field, not employed, but also for others who are in deployment. And the National Employment Service also help them. According to the mobility schemes, we can say that now we are in the process of also coming to the validation of the non-formal learning and non-formal education, informal learning, and we have the agency for the qualification and also the skills, sectorial skills. But we can put also that the young people and others who go through this kind of the education can also be validated by this mechanism. It's not put in place fully, but all the strategic documents are there, and now we are how to put that really in the practice. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the emphasizing the use of validation, or the value of validation of informal and non-formal learning. Last but not least, Raimo, a last reflection from your side on the questions.
Thank you, Xavier, for the question. And I think the first answer is that we accept that this takes place with or without the help of practitioners. So this is a shift that is in formal learning and formal learning. So this same thing is happening with the career development and guidance. And I think this relates now to the shift from supplier to the individual, that we are part of the guidance. We see a learning outcome, which is the career management skills, which include the sort of interest and putting oneself a vision, and then skills to obtain relevant information, find it, use it, and to what has relevance into one's sort of own future. And then another one is then what is the sort of reliable presence of the individuals, and also what type of presence guidance can have in this type of information. So it's like an affordance. And that's why I was using the word co-careering. That is describing the shift. It's not only driven by organizations, but it's sort of emerging as a joint process.
Thank you. And for that, we need to have the skills, acquire the skills to be able to co-create our own learning process.
Exactly.
Thanks for all your contributions. I would invite Christina for our final reflections, final words of this session.
No, thank you. And I don't want, Denise made our colleague, she made a great job in chat. We have, the statements of the most important statements of our speakers. So really, I would not draw all the conclusions. That there were some excellent statements like, business to go to school, schools to go to business, to co-create our career and to co-create as well our services and the way we deliver. Strong skills and not soft skills, and really the fact that we have to reinvent ourselves and to reinvent our policies and to really understand that the world is changing. Yeah, and I would conclude with the word that actually you selected, if I remember well, in the word cloud in the motivation. Yeah, I think that if I remember well, that was the most important word emerging from this consultation, and Snežana also mentioned that. So it's about motivation when it comes to accessibility and attractiveness of learning processes. So thank you very much to speakers, also to interpreters, and to all the colleagues who are here with us today. And we promise we continue on this. We will continue on all these topics. Jolene.
That for sure. This is just the start of our discussion, and we're looking forward to discussing more and learning more from each other. Together, we will make lifelong learning happen.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. We thanks also the followers in social media stream.